So we already lost a couple of LEDs there. Oh, one is back. Sorry, I will remove my jacket because it's hot, and also because I want you all to understand that I am part of the Miteco team. So, welcome everyone. It's really a pleasure to have you here and to see all these people here in Napoli for the Janus conference. The first caveat for you is that my presentation is not going to be a research-oriented presentation. It's going to be just about education. The research part will be presented by my colleagues who are part of the Miteco team. And I want to talk about education, not just because of the fact that I am a university professor, but also because of the fact that I do believe that, education feeds research, and then research can act as a loop back in order to improve the way you educate your students. And this is what I will try and demonstrate with my presentation. By the way, there are a few students of mine who are sitting in the last rows here in the room. Please just chat with them when we have a break, exchange ideas with them, and also encourage the students themselves to do the same. So the title of the presentation is From Zero to Hero in 50 Hours. And the idea is that what I would like to demonstrate with the presentation is that if you start studying RTC technologies, you can become acquainted with most of them. And if you then drill down a bit more, you can become a professional in the RTC ecosystem. And I will try and demonstrate this with facts, let's say. So about the presentation, if you want to have a look at it a bit more in depth, you can just scan this QR code. The presentation is online and available if you want to have it also for offline vision. So I will just leave 10 more seconds. Are you done? Hope so. Okay, so about me, my name is Simon Romano, Simon Pietro actually. I am a professor at Federico II. I teach quite a number of classes. Basically, my background is in networking, and I somehow specialize in two parallel fields. One is real-time communication, the other one is security. And today's topic is real-time communication. I am also carrying out a few side activities as part of my university duties. In particular, I am the scientific director of a security-oriented academy in cooperation with Accenture that we have called Hackademy, just to somehow report the fact that we are working with an offensive approach towards security. I am also the managing director of the Apple Developer Academy, that is the only one academy in Europe in cooperation with Apple. This is a very nice initiative that we started back in 2016 in cooperation with people at Apple. And I'm also somehow addicted to technology transfer. I have co-founded up to now 3 different spin-offs of the university. One is called Epsilon. These are in rigorous time order, let's say. So Epsilon was the first that I founded together with a few friends of mine and colleagues of mine. The name is Epsilon. The idea was to have a company as small as you desire. So that's why we called it like this. But basically behind the name, there is also an acronym associated with learning online. This was our main focus. Now it works on cloud-based technologies. Then there is Mitico. I will call Mitico it now here because our idea was that the name should be pronounced as Mitico, which is mythical in Italian. But we now know that we were pronouncing it wrong, so people are used to saying Miteco, and we are getting used to that. Lorenzo calls it Miteco. I do not agree with Lorenzo. And then there is the last one that is called SEXY, with C and S, which stands for Security Solutions for Innovation. That is a company that aims at demonstrating that security can be catchy. It's not just boring. And this is a hard task, by the way. Okay, so the agenda of the presentation is like this. First, I would like to thank Federico II. Federico II is my university. I'm a proud member of the community. This is my alma mater, my mother soul, let's say. But I will use Federico II as an introduction to the remaining part of the presentation. Basically, I will try and drill down a bit first on the things that Lorenzo has already touched upon, basically a quick recap about the Mythico team. And then I will really focus on the main part of the presentation, that is the class that I teach at Federico II, which deals with web and real-time communication. The name of the class is WebRTC, and this is not by chance. It used to be called telematic applications. In the past, when Lorenzo was a student, this was the name, but then we changed the name. And by the way, this is a class that is entirely taught in English, so we have also quite a few students who come from abroad in the framework of the Erasmus project to attend the class. I will skip this because in the interest of time, but just for you to know, Federico II, the only thing that I will say is that is probably the oldest public university in the world. It is, at least in Europe, officially, the oldest public university. It is this year 800 years old, but it is also really a university that looks to the future, and this is what I would like to show to you. So let's now move back to what Lorenzo was saying. Basically, he was presenting the Mythico team. I have put here the technical team. You will see that there is one more person that does not have a STEM, a technical background, but all of the others are the people that are here around. Some of them you already know, some others might be new to you. But just to recap, let's start with the CEO, Tobia. Tobia has been a student of mine. This was Tobia's master's thesis project, and this dates back to quite a few years ago. Tobia was not just a student of mine, he was also a PhD student of mine, working on how you can dynamically configure a network in order to properly support advanced conferencing scenarios. He has always worked side by side with Lorenzo. They were the first two students who decided to work with me on the ITF-related activities that basically all fall in the realm of conferencing, media, control, and the like. Toby is also a great friend of mine. We've been sharing a lot across the years. This was an ITF some years ago. Then we have Lorenzo. Lorenzo does need no presentation. I will skip the joke about the fact that Lorenzo is the father of Janus, but I am the father of Lorenzo. I will skip this because Lorenzo then uses to say that the fathers of Janus is Zeus, so I would be Kronos. And if you know a bit about Greek mythology, Zeus kills Kronos. But in the end, I discovered that Lorenzo was lying. Student of mine. He's been a PhD student of mine. And this dates back to 2015. So we were already looking at how you can scale conferencing, which was quite, let's say, at least one step ahead of the pack, I would say. We also tried to foster this work inside the ITF, but we simply failed. And with Lorenzo, I have somehow trotted the globe quite extensively, and we've had lots of fun. This was San Francisco, I think. Then Alessandro. I'm presenting these guys once again with a timeline. Alessandro arrived just a bit later than Lorenzo and Tobia. He was a student of mine, and his co-advisors were Lorenzo and Tobia. But Alessandro was quick. He started his PhD before Lorenzo and Tobia. He got his PhD before them. because Lorenzo and Tobia decided after a while to also embark in the PhD journey. Alessandro is known for arguing quite extensively with Lorenzo and Tobia in all occasions, and he has become the fourth fundamental brick of the Mythico building. This is Mythico team version 1.0, okay? And this was in Paris, one of the first IETF meetings where we were streaming the conferencing sessions. And once again, we look a bit younger, but actually we were a bit younger. Okay, then we started upgrading the team. And this is the first upgrade that we had. This is Paolo. There would be no Mythico today without Paolo. Paolo is our full stack engineer. It is always hard to find English names for Italian jobs, okay? Paolo does everything inside Mythico, starting with plugging cables, arriving at designing scalable architectures, writing code, and so on and so forth. And guess what? Paolo was a student of mine. He was working on desktop sharing as part of his master thesis project. And he became also part of the Globetrotters who support IETF meetings, RIPE meetings, conferences, and like. And by the way, when Paolo is there, I'm happy because I can let Paolo do the hard work and I can just focus on attending sessions and focusing on my own interests and stuff. Alessandro Toppi is the first of the two so-called prodigal sons because Alessandro was a student of mine. He graduated with the thesis on social TV, but then he went working for an Italian company that was providing VoIP-enabled, no, let's say WebRTC-enabled VoIP services. The company is called Tiscali. It is a nice company in beautiful Sardinia. Then he decided to come back to Napoli and we hired him. And he's with us since quite a long time now. The second prodigal son is our new entry, Antonio Bevilacqua. And once again, Antonio Bevilacqua has done his thesis with me, together with his mate, whose name is Pasquale Boemio, who is not here but will be here. They were working on a very nice advanced architecture that was leveraging WebRTC data channels in order to implement peer-to-peer communication. By the way, Antonio also holds a PhD, even though in this case the PhD has not been issued by Federico II because he has spent some time in Ireland. And now he is back as part of the so-called return of brains that we are trying to foster in Italy. This is, last but not least, Paolo Navarretta. And in this case, he was not a student of mine. Paolo has never studied with me. And this year, just because we wanted to demonstrate that, yes, it is possible to be hired by Mythico, even though you have not been a student of mine. One minor comment that I would like to do related to the team is that, as you might have figured out, we have some small gender balance issues inside Mythico. And yes, we are working on that. So we are trying to hire, the next hire, we hope, will be a female, because we do know that this is important, and because, as you will see, female are better than male, as you know, and I'm also trying to work on that at the university in order to stimulate participation by female engineers, and we are improving on that, but we have to improve at Mythico for sure. Okay, just for the sake of completeness, this is Danilo De Mari. He's a fundamental part of the team. He's the only one who has an economic background, so he looks after all financial things. So one thing should be clear from my long introduction is that there is a strong link between Federico II and what Mythico does. I think this is obvious. And the reason why this happens is that I teach WebRTC at Federico II, and I try and teach WebRTC in a specific way. My way of doing education is perhaps, hopefully, a bit disruptive when compared to the classical way of doing lectures, you know, a frontal way of injecting stuff into students' brains. I try and ask students to be as interactive as possible, and also try and foster activities that are that have a practical flavor. So what I'm showing here is my personalized brainstorming about WebRTC. When I had to start the new class, I tried to put ink on paper on a canvas my way of thinking of WebRTC, and especially my way of thinking of what are the key technologies that you have to talk about if you want to somehow allow people to get acquainted with what WebRTC is all about. So obviously, this is a bit confusing, and this is the first slide that I present in my class. And the reaction of my students typically is like this. The very first reaction is, what are you talking about? So that's why the following slides are a bit simpler. We try and start easy with a Wikipedia-style approach. We talk about communication. We say that communication is a way for putting in touch two or more entities that are remote and who want to transfer information. We just refresh our brains with respect to what World Wide Web is all about. We drill down a bit on communicating with real-time constraints, and then we try and put it all together by saying that WebRTC is currently a standard, basically. Okay, it's an effort that has come to completion, that has seen the interaction of two different standardization communities, which are the ITF and the W3C. And we also try and stress exactly that point, which means that if you want to become professional in the way you work with WebRTC, you cannot be just a coder, you cannot be just a networking guy. You must be both things together, because you do need some proficiency with writing code, but you also do need to somehow look under the hood, to look at all of the protocols and technologies that are lurking behind the scenes, because otherwise you can just use web APIs, and this is not enough if you want to really go beyond just scratching the surface. So basically, if we just zoom a bit on the picture that I was showing, you see that we have W3C, we have the ITF, we have the dot that is associated with the joint result of the efforts coming from these two communities. And so that's why we then have these two macro fields. One is web communication, the other one is real-time communication. So that's where we start our journey from. So it's web, it's real-time, it's a bit of peer-to-peer, because, you know, peer-to-peer is part of the game here. And so we start the lectures with the web part. So basically, the entire flow of activities is first web, then real-time, then the two things together. And when it comes to the web, you will see we have first client, then server, then the two things together. And also in terms of technologies, I will try and sketch a bit the overall path that we follow. Obviously, there is quite a lot of programming, because as you know, you cannot deal with web communication if you are not capable of using the official application programming interfaces, if you're not good at understanding what has to happen on the client side, what on the server side, what has to be synchronous, what has to be asynchronous, and so on and so forth. So if you see here, for example, we try and identify that there is something very important, that is the JavaScript language. JavaScript can be leveraged both on the client side and on the server side. There is the HTTP-based interaction, but we need also asynchronous communication, so we can either stretch HTTP to the farthest point that we can, or we can opt for alternative technologies, and this is something that we try and study. When it comes to real time, obviously we identify the main areas of interest, which are streaming, instant messaging, interactive AV communication, and conferencing. But as I was telling you, there is the networking part. So we do not just study how you can use APIs. We also study the protocols and all of the frameworks that are important if you want to really manage to arrive at a fully fledged communication with WebRTC. So, for example, you have the entire suite associated with NAT traversal. You have to understand the intricacies of the ICE protocol. You have to understand where it comes from. So all of the different components that are used in order to arrive at the finalized definition, design, and implementation of that protocol suite. So now, just to go really a bit more into the details, we start with the basics, simple things. That's why the presentation was called From Zero to Hero. We start from zero, so no background. I do know that my students have already attended at least the networking class that we have, but I also do know that they have attended that class at the third year of their university studies, and they then meet me at the second year of their advanced studies. So some of the things might have disappeared from their young brains, so that's why they need some refresh. And I really start with that, HTTP. Then we start discussing about programming, and as weird as it might look, I start with the oldest things, Common Gateway Interface. Have you ever heard about it if you are less than 25? I don't know, but yes, you should have heard about CGI. Then you will never use it, but what you would discover is that all of the higher level frameworks that we all use, they are based on concepts that come from exactly there. So we study that. Then we start saying that there are a bit more advanced frameworks, the plain old Java servlets. We give them a look, and this is needed, as you will see, because if you know what a servlet is all about, then you can also understand what Spring Boot does, for example, the inversion of control paradigm. If you do not know anything about a plain old servlet, you will never understand the inner workings of advanced frameworks. We know that Java is not the only language out there. We try and touch upon other languages. So, for example, a bit of Python coding with either Flask or Django. We try and do this with a practical approach. So we always try and install things, work on at least skeleton apps, and implement them in order to arrive at a fully fledged bare-bone implementation of something working. Okay, so for the server side, we have Spring Boot. We start talking about more advanced topics, microservices, inversion of control, things like that. Then we move to the client side again, and we say that if you need dynamicity on the client side, you want to do things before touching the server, you must write some code that is interpreted and run inside your browser. So that's what we do. Then we say that also asynchronicity plays a role. It is important, and the old way of doing that, we now say the old way, but it was the new way of doing that when Lorenzo was one of my students, is through the AJAX technology, which, by the way, contains that X that stands for XML, which now should be perhaps replaced by a J for JSON or things like that. But yes, we study that. We understand why the paradigm can be switched and how this can happen. We discuss about the JavaScript engines that we can add on top of our basic engines inside our browsers, which, by the way, is also something that is important if you want to understand what your JSAP does inside your browser. We also discuss the more advanced approaches like the fetch API and so on and so forth. And then, yes, we still study XML. Okay, we both study the language itself, syntax, well-formatedness, validity, what is a schema, what is a DTD, and so on and so forth. I also try and show to the students that nowadays with XML, you still do lots of things, perhaps writing an RFC for the ITF, okay? We study, obviously, this also programmatically. So we start how you can code with XML and all of the APIs. We move again to the server side. We say that JavaScript is not just for the client side, but it is also for the server side. We have the beautiful Node.js framework, and then we complete the picture with things like React, React Native, how you can work on implementing a cross-platform application without going native. We go native with things like the Apple Developer Academy, where we teach students that they should never write something that is cross-platform, that they must go down the right path, that is Apple user interface guidelines, Apple libraries. This is what we have to do there, because this is a dedicated partnership. But when I am at the university, what I teach is open approaches, and so cross-platform and like. Okay, for the RTC part, we start with the real protocol that is still the basis for all real-time transfers, that is RTP. Typically, this lecture was delivered by Lorenzo, now he's too busy. We studied the SIP protocol. It is still that much important. We study all of the, not all, but most of the protocols associated with streaming, which means RTSP. RTSP for us, for example, still plays a role that is of paramount importance when we have to stream the audio video sessions, at least the audio sessions, for example, in the ITF, they're based on that. We study MPEG-Dash. I typically show to my students why DAZN does not work fine. If you want to watch your favorite football match in real time, that thing does not work just because of this. We study RTMP, which is now somehow has been obsoleted by many people, as you know, still use it. If you are familiar with how you can stream something, an event, by leveraging a CDN, we study peer-to-peer streaming. Obviously, we have to understand what is behind the scenes, as I was telling you. So we touch upon NAT traversal with a standard approach. So we study the RFCs, we study the protocols, and we land on ICE. We arrive at the ICE protocol. And we try and illustrate the inner workings of ICE with all of the things that are associated with it. Instant messaging is part of our lectures, and here we try and provide students with a flavor of the whole picture, okay? So basically most of the technologies that are there, so XMPP, MQTT, and all of the others that you can think of. We study SIP with extensions that are called simple and the like, but then we also study how you can implement instant messaging, for example, via WebRTC. And for example, once again, by leveraging one of the plugins that we have in Janus. This is where I start talking about Janus, okay? We also illustrate the latest fashion approaches like Matrix and the like, which is much more than just an instant messaging technology, but this is where I introduce it. Okay, and obviously, when we complete the journey, we arrive at WebRTC, which puts everything all together. If you now have a strong background with all of the web APIs, if you have some background with the networking part, if you know what RTP is all about, if you know SDP and the like, you can know about having a signaling server in Node, implementing a simple communication between two endpoints via a peer connection. You can also add some data. And if you want, you can add a server-side component that allows you to go a bit beyond the peer-to-peer communication paradigm that you can implement in the absence of middle boxes, let's say. And obviously, this is where Janus comes to the fore. It might be a different technology, obviously, yes, but why not Janus? It is open source, it is there, and we are the creators of Janus, so we can use it. To complete, we also study Quick. You cannot somehow come out of an RTC class without having studied the quick protocol, which is important. And as Lorenzo was mentioning, I also make a few mentions to the media over quick ongoing effort. Okay, so that's basically it. I'm almost done, but I would like to show you one part of the class. Let's say that 1/3 of the exam and also of the mark that you get at the exam depends on you implementing a project work. It's a group work, typically. Groups can be between 1 and 5 people on average. And you have to work on a project in a semi-professional way. So you have to use Git, you have to push your stuff on a privately owned GitLab repository that is associated with my classes and with all of the thesis project that I do. And this is a selection of a few WebRTC projects. Just to give you an idea, I brought here 2 different examples, and the examples are the 2 topmost projects that you see there, which, by the way, are the latest ones that have been submitted by a few students who are here, by the way, who do not know that I was going to show this. But I was really shocked by these projects, and this is something that happens to me quite often. I have to say that there is nothing that provides me with greater joy than witnessing my students overpass my own abilities. There are projects that my students have implemented that I would not be capable of implementing. I'm not saying that I'm the best, not at all, but I have some knowledge about this stuff because I have to teach it. But what happens at the end of the classes is that typically I am surprised with the outcomes that arrive from the students. Just to give you an idea, just let's have a look at the title of this project. Unfortunately, this is in Italian. The class is in English, but the students can also submit projects in Italian and do the oral examination part in Italian, just for their comfort. Here we have Rust, WebAssembly, and Quick on top of a web transport communication channel in order to implement low latency audio streaming. And this simply works. This has been submitted by Giuseppe, who is sitting there. I will not go too much into the details, but if you meet him, you can chat with him about this. All of the technologies that are here, let's say 80% of the technologies that are here were not part of my class. So one of the things that I ask my students to do is to go beyond what we see during the lectures, during the class. And just, if they have curiosities, just drill down on things that they like. So here we have a WebAssembly plus Rust front-end that interacts in an intricate way with a number of components in order to carry out authentication, and then to, in the end, stream low latency audio. By the way, Giuseppe is fond of audio production, so that's why I worked on that. And this was very nice. So you have all of the documentation that is submitted that typically is somehow presented as if you were presenting a software engineering project. So usual stuff, software engineering with sequence diagrams, component diagrams, and the like. This is the overall flow of this project. And once again, this is not supposed to be a thesis project. Okay, so in terms of credits that you can earn with your work, this is not something that is worth 6 months. Should be between 2 and 3 weeks, something like this. So as you see, people arrive at doing things like this in just that amount of time. Then the last project is from Marika and Andrea, who are sitting there. I always say they are my preferred couple of 2023-2024 academic year, even though I don't think they're a couple in loving sense. Okay, they are good friends, but it's your privacy, and I will not break into it. But basically, this is a multiplayer project, and they also uploaded a very nice demo of the project itself, so you can understand what it is all about. It is a very simple game where you have players. You win if you don't bump into the other player's trail, and you have to work on this in order to make this be as flawless as possible. And they implemented these into different flavors. They work both with WebSockets and with WebRTC, and they were also somehow benchmarking their implementation. And this was very, very nice. They had to work on a number of, customization tricks in order to make the things work, but I'm not going to explain this to the RTC community that is here. It was just to say that, as you can see, these are quite advanced functionality that they have implemented. And they started with almost zero knowledge about WebRTC. Obviously, they were already good at programming. We're talking about the last year of the advanced course on computer engineering. So I give for granted that they know what an if-then-else construct is all about. But yes, they became acquainted with the entire set of APIs and technologies that I was trying to describe during the classes. So with this, I'm almost done. But I have to say that I will not step down off the stage without you reading this slide. I'm concluding all of my presentation like this lately. Why this? Because we're living very sad times. There is war everywhere. We are all for peace. And so that's my nerdy way of stating in clear terms that we do need peace for sure and for all. So that's it. I'm done with my presentation. If you have any questions, I will be really glad to take them. And obviously, I will be around. If you want to exchange ideas, I'm more than open, especially if you, as I know many of you, have experiences with teaching. Just come to me and exchange your ideas about how you do that, how I might improve my way of teaching. And that's it. Thanks a lot. So no questions? I think we're streaming live. I will ask. Okay, thanks so much.